What's up? This is Diva, delivered, inspired, victorious, anointed, and I have the privilege and pleasure of speaking with Dante Stewart of Shoutin in the Fire. Let me see, an American Epistle. Listen, when I read this book gave me the language to talk about the things that didn't make sense to me in Christianity and helped me to see where white supremacy is. So, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you played football at Clemson, just a little bit so people can know who you are.
Yeah. So thank you for this gracious opportunity and just chance to spend some time with you and share space and with those who either look at this or hear or write up from it or read a write up from it and things like that. So thank you to each one of you. My name is Dante Stewart. I am from South Carolina, from a small country town in South Carolina, somewhere between, I like to tell people I'm between three places. I'm between the place where my grandparents lived, the place where my parents live, where we live, and the place where I went to school. And many Southern children grew up like that. You know, you got your own house, but you got grandma and them house, and then you got school. And so my grandmother and them live in Sandy Run, South Carolina. My parents live in Swansea, South Carolina, and I attended school in St. Matthews, South Carolina. So that's where I'm from. I did my school at Clemson University, where I met my wife, of which we have just celebrated 8 years being married this year. And after I got done playing ball, we got married and been married ever since. I studied sociology back at Clemson. And now I'm at Emery University finishing up my degree in modern religious thought and experience, where I do work on the intersections of theory, of theology, and literature, particularly centered around James Baldwin studies and the religious imagination and theology of James Baldwin. And yes, I am the author of Shoutin in the Fire, an American Epistle, which is my debut memoir. And I've kind of got to the point where I have accepted that that is the type of writing, the lane that I'm in is writing memoir type work that finds a way to weave ideas and criticism and history, but also personal narrative and things like that. I write also in public, done work with the New York Times, with Washington Post, with ESPN's Anscape, Religion News Service, Sojourners. I've been in a lot of places. Thankfully, graciously. So yeah, that's me. And I have two children, two incredible children, two beautiful, beautiful, amazing children.
Yes. So I want to jump right into this book because, like I said, when I started reading this, there were a couple of things that stuck out to me, like you gave me the language, but also the way that you write. Your writing is very poetic. As a poet, I was very impressed with that. I was able to see the entire picture. So what I would like to do is just go with some quotes and just let you just say whatever you want to say about those quotes. Okay?
Oh, I love that. That's incredible.
Good. So there's an old King James Version Bible sitting on the bookshelf. It is black, rugged. The gold lining on the pages shines as light hits it. Then I'm going to skip down. When I open up this old Bible, dusty words emerge, conjuring up memories of poetic sermons and sweaty mics smelling like old metal and stank breath. And then I go down a little bit more. When I read these ancient scriptures, I hear the way they flowed from my mama's lips. When she recited scripture, she spoke it poetically, adding the old F at the end of words like the King James Version did. Those words carried the divine. Those words carried the divine. It was as transporting as fiction, yet nothing like fiction. Something you could only call magical, yet nothing like magic. The words were an entire world, but they were also in her Black body in this white country. These words carried both weight and worth and worship and worry and whatever W words you can describe, words that put you back together again when you, your body, and your country are shattered.
Mm.
Listen, that in and of itself was church. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I really wanted to start the book on an object, and I wanted every chapter to be able to have a working metaphor or an object that would be useful to the reader, that they can almost touchstones or things like that they can return to again and again and again, whether you're introduced to the Bible in the beginning and then you see the ways in which the Bible is weaponized in the middle. But then you also see the ways in which, like, the Bible is ingested by the end. And there's something about, sacred speech, whereby which we, in some sense, is like the end of a sermon, where you done kind of gone through your textual criticism, you've gone through your historical narrative and background, you've gone through the relevant question, your preaching principles, and now in this moment toward the end, you've gotten to the moment where it's time to shout, where it's time to close the sermon. And the Bible closes, and it's as if the preacher herself or himself or their self becomes the very voice of the divine, speaking over, through, and around the lives of the listeners. And so I wanted to begin the book there. I wanted to begin the book home in some sense, because it's almost like there's in literature or even storytelling this kind of device entitled the hero's journey. And the hero, they get the call, and then they get supernatural aid and help, and then they go on their own journey and meet a mentor. They learn something and cross the threshold of life, but then they enter into conflict, and something in them dies, and something is reborn. And by the time they get back home, they have been changed and transformed by their journey. And so for me, this book almost follows a similar narrative, where you meet me home, leaving home, being changed, things dying within me, and returning home again. And that place of home for me was always centered around what we as Black folk did with what we had and how we made it Black, and took whatever was menial, something as small as a King James Version Bible, and we turned it in something miraculous, something that can speak to us and ground us and help us in these moments.
So it sounds to me like your mother was instrumental in the foundation of your faith. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, my mother, my daddy, my grandma, and things like that. Like my granddaddy. I mean, so much of the way I grew up Pentecostal, and I'm very much, still Pentecostal by orientation. Pentecost Sunday is tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw me on a suit.
I know that's right.
For Pentecost Sunday, even though I am at a Progressive Baptist church now, and in a PMBC right now, and I am and my pastor, Reverend Dr. Charles E. Goodman, he is very much Pentecostal as well. And so we both have that similar flavor, where we both kind of grew up Pentecostal, and now we're in this space. And he's much older than I am, still though young, still much older than I am, but we have similar experiences where, like, there are points and touchstones of Pentecostalism that still shapes, how we think about the world and orient ourselves toward the world. And so, like, we always talk about, and if you hear a sermon, he's always going to go back home somehow, some way. And I'm the same way, where, they're for me in the Pentecostalism of my youth, is still reminiscence of home that still linger within, within today, where we're like, it's not just my mother, though it is. It's not just my father, though it is. Not just my grandmother, my grandfather, but it's all of them working together. Yes. It's not just Bishop, and Uncle Sambo, but it's all of them working together, and me trying to, as a 30-year-old, figure out, okay, what is it about home that keeps calling me, and how can I go back there and find whatever I have lost? So yes, my mama, indeed, without question, it's formative and foundational to my faith, but also my mother is part of this larger community of voices and people who shape who I am today. I love my mama. My mom is like my mama, but she's also, and she would even say this, that she's a part of this kind of larger community of voices.
So you had the village. You had the village.
100%. Yeah, 100%. 100%. Because what else did we have? Growing up Black and rural, if anybody know anything about Black rural life, so many of us have grown up in what cities deem to be unincorporated communities, which is a community that is not governed, by county. It's like a community that creates its own story and it generates its own kind of communal belonging and being together. And so many of Black rural people, we're kind of on the outskirts of the city, and going to town is kind of, we have to go to town to go get things. And so you have to figure out how to build life where you're at. You have to learn how to work the field. You have to learn how to, work the car and work on the car. You're going to learn how to do these things and find these remedies and find ways to play, to figure out. I ain't had no swimming pool nowhere near me. We didn't have no basketball court nowhere near us. Like we had to create a basketball court out of dirt, and a basketball goal. Like hopefully the dirt was hard enough to be able to bounce the ball. Like we didn't have a rec league where I was at. So we had to play football in the field by my grandma's house. We didn't have a track where we were at. So the concrete became our track. And so yes, I had a village who really formed me, because in some sense, that's how it had to be for so many of us.
Yeah, that is awesome. So I would like to have you read instead of me, because I would like to hear, if you don't mind, on page 8.
Indeed.
When it says, "When I think about my mama."
Yeah. Okay. Let me find it in my book, because I'm on my oh, here we go. So when I think about my mom and how much she and all those Black folk held on to those stories, I don't just see people who courageously shook kingdoms and who preach audacious messages of liberation. I also see people who know what it means to live with deep trauma and still love themselves enough to believe in their future. I see them like the prophets, trying to shake kingdoms and rock souls and straighten bodies back up again, and love us in simple ways that cooled our bodies and cooled our spirits and stopped our trembling. To believe in the better, to believe in your future, to shout in the midst of a country on fire, to stare down lions, to shake the foundations of the empire, to make meaning in the face of death, to fail, to create, to live, and to love. This is the stuff of hope. It is not an assent to nostalgia, myth, or lies. It is the audacious belief that one's body, one's story, one's future does not end in this moment.
That's just, it's just profound, because it is the story of our existence in this country. And it is not an old story that has changed. It is the same old story that is camouflaged. And, it's really sad that our grandchildren, or at least my grandchildren, you ain't got no grandchildren yet, but my grandchildren, I didn't think that my grandchildren would be asking the same questions that I had to ask. And so when you talk about the incident, when the man shot at y'all when y'all were kids, you want to talk about that just a little bit, because the way you told that, Dante, was so amazing. I was right there. I could see it all.
Yeah. So in this moment we're driving. It's even hard to talk about, like, for real, I ain't gonna flex. We're driving, and my brother get into it with him. We stop the car and he thinks that we like threw some trash on the ground, and like my brother said something back to him, and like literally this old white man literally is running inside of this house. We were headed to a graduation party, and like, it's almost as if like he wanted to harm us. Like it wasn't even almost as if, I could see it in his eyes that he wanted to harm us. He wanted to destroy us. He like legit, like dude wanted to kill us. Like if I've ever seen any eyes that showed a type of complete disregard for another match with a type of disgust that doesn't care about how you treat another person, it was him. And so, we're about 30 feet away from this porch, and he started yelling because he thought we threw some trash. Give me 1 second. Give me 1 second. Give me one second.
Okay, it's all right. That's okay. You have kids, and I had 3 at the same time, and they were stair steps. And so I know that as soon as you focus your attention on something else, then you are the only thing that they want. So it's all right.
Exactly. So in this moment, he think we threw some trash in his yard. Then he started yelling at us. And then he says, "You be here when I get back." And he rushed in his house. And my brother, being the brother he is, he cursed him out or whatnot. And then he ran and jumped, like he was on the right side of the car in the back. He was in the right side of the car in the back toward the trunk. And my brother ran back into the other side of the car and literally literally he sped off. And as he's speeding off, I'll never forget the sounds. Like I could hear it today, and I could see like as if I'm literally looking straight ahead, and I can see his house. It's like he had this like little porch that wasn't really a porch. It didn't have no bars on it. It was just like a flat porch. It was a trailer. I had a flat porch or whatnot. To the right, there was like a little garden and some stuff to the right. If my mind served me correctly, he had on a white shirt with blue jeans, had glasses and a hat on. Or whatnot. And literally, as he came back out, as we're speeding off, he literally shot at us 3 times. I'll never forget it. Pow, pow, pow. I'll never forget it in my life. I won't ever forget it in my life. And yeah, he shot at us. And then the thing that is most disturbing about this is the response. Like that was the most disturbing part. Years later, as I asked my mama, as I was getting ready to write this, and I told her I was going to write about this, I started almost becoming like an investigative journalist. I wanted to make sure I got my facts right and got it straight. And the hardest part was when my mother and my father, the local authorities, they did not believe that had happened. And literally as my mother's walking in the municipal court, like the cop is talking to the old man saying that if these Black people kept their kids in place, then none of this would have happened. And that just, and my mother has an impeccable memory. Like she has an impeccable memory, especially regarding her kids. And yeah, that just was the hardest part. But the thing is, the crazy part about this though, is that if you literally my mom and them, once that happened, dude got off or whatnot. My mom and them went by that house and they prayed against that house. They prayed against that house. And weeks went by. Next thing you know, the man garden died. Weeks after that, his house is gone completely. If you drive by there today, you'll see the lot, but there will be no house. And, I don't know how people want to interpret that, but how I interpret it is in some sense, if the law don't get you, then something will, and that goes all the way back to African spirituality, that, we believe that, good should prevail in the end. And we will use every means that we possibly can to make sure that it does.
Yeah, that reminded me that I had recently learned that the word abracadabra is Aramaic for "I will create as I speak." And And that's what that, when you told me that, I don't think that we really understand how powerful our words are, because God said, let there be, and there was. If we believe that, and we believe that we're born in his image and in his likeness, then we have that power. But anyway, enough about me talking. I want to get back to you. So this was traumatic for you.
Oh, indeed.
And we as people of color in this country have collectively experienced such trauma that now there's such thing as post-traumatic slave syndrome that is passed down to us in our DNA. How can we, as people of color, get past this thing that we know is not changed? Let me rephrase that, because not get past it. How can we navigate it on a regular basis, this thing that others us and continues to other us? Because I think that it's just because they see when we have an equal opportunity that we will excel in our own way.
I personally, I think that the key to trauma in some sense is being aware of it, and being attentive to it. So awareness and attentiveness, is critical when you're talking about finding healing. When I think about this book, I needed to mine my memory. I needed to go back to places that were both traumatic and joyous, that looked good on me and that didn't look good on me, that kind of rooted me into a tradition that I want to be connected to, but also that took me on a transformative journey as I went through various communities. And I think there's an attentiveness, awareness in some sense of grief and trauma within these experiences. So if I can't name it, then I can't care for it. And I think we don't have a problem as Black people naming the various traumas that inflict our bodies, our minds, and wounds our spirit. The problem is that when we name them, the response, instead of being compassion, is oftentimes hostility. Instead of being embraced, we're often blamed and shamed. Instead of being empowered, we're often exploited. In the case of Juneteenth, for example, like nobody asks for Juneteenth, particularly in this kind of post George Floyd moment, because Black people have always been seeking for public recognition of Juneteenth. But I mean, in the sense of Juneteenth being made this kind of federal holiday, in the moment where Black people were making demands, especially in the post George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery moment, that was not a demand. So oftentimes, instead of our demands being embraced, is oftentimes exploited for other people's gain. And if we can't be aware of the ways in which those things happen, then we can't care for them and be liberated through them. Because I don't think that I don't think that we are who we are, beyond this kind of collective and cultural memory that in some sense, reminds us who we are and roots us in a tradition that we come from. I am not of the perspective that, trauma is all we hold, but I am of the perspective that there is something about trauma that can be meaningful in the sense of what we did given the situation that we were forced in. I'm thinking Toni Morrison, when she talks about the site of memory, that lecture that she gave, where she says something about imagination, that it is about imagining pondering the actual and imagining the possible. Trauma is a part of the actual experience of Black people in this country, but it is also the place where we say, okay, we don't just simply live in trauma. I was listening to Carrie Mae Weems, the visual artist, her talk to Dr. Dwight McBride, who's the president of the New School. And one of the things she talked about is Dr. McBride was asking her about what type of questions that we as scholars and intellectuals and artists and activists and pastors and all of us people should be asking in this moment. And she said that one thing we must remember is that the arc of history actually does bend towards justice, albeit going through all types of roadblocks. And what we do as people is a part of that bending work. And I think right now in these moments, as she says, is that it is a great opportunity to recover the language of we. You know, when you go through grief and trauma, it's not just individual, but there's a collective dimension to that grief and that trauma. And if, as Carrie Mae Weems suggests, we can find a way to be guided by that we, to bring together the various forces that we have, to bring together the various imaginations that we have, the frameworks that we have, the art that we have, the commitments that we have, then in some sense, we can lean on what we learned in the past to ground us together in the present in hopes that we can be the type of people that imagine a different and better future, what she calls an amazing opportunity without being opportunistic. And so I think if I'm thinking about how we kind of get through these moments, you know, as I was trying to do that. Lean into the opportunity, lean into the imagination without being opportunistic, but being compassionate, empathetic, with grace and humility and honesty and vulnerability, trying to figure out how can one be liberated to an experience of self-love. And if we can reach self-love enough, you know, with as many people as possible, then collective love has to be its own outworking.
Yeah, that's amazing. You talked about self-love, and I want you to, I have it marked, but I want you to read where you talk about when you realized that you didn't love yourself. That for me was another moment of revelation, because I did not want to acknowledge that for so many years I did not love my Black self, my you know, tar baby self, my purple gum self, you know. And so that was a moment for me in the book. I'm trying to figure out what page it's on so I can ask you to read it. When you talked about, no, it's here. Okay. Many of the white Christians in my church, it's on page 108.
All right, let me go. 1 second. Yep, got it.
Okay. Go ahead, please.
Oh, for sure, for sure. So many of the white Christians in my church did not see Philando as I did. I saw a person, they saw a problem. There was always something about Black bodies that must be blamed. Inez blamed Philando. The white people I was around blamed Philando. How could they think this about him? I wondered. How could they once again blame us for our own deaths? By that time, I was exhausted. Every conversation I entered, I wasn't just arguing for them to see how poor their views were. I was arguing for both Philando's and my right to live. Arguing with people who said they loved Jesus. Arguing with people who said they wanted reconciliation. Arguing with people who said they cared about our suffering. Arguing for them to give up their lie that you could say you love us and not fight for us. They didn't believe me. They wouldn't. Neither my tears nor my anger seemed to change them. Yeah.
Operating in a space, in that space. I have a daughter who is affiliated with a church much like the ones you talked about earlier in the book, when it was a mostly white congregation. And I have always worried about her in that space, because I know that what you said something very succinctly in the book, and you said the ideal Christian is a white male. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, when I think of Christian history, especially in America, if we even thinking about the early colonial times, that where you talking about like, yo, like who was who's the saved one, who was the standard for salvation? You know, those theologians and those practitioners and those pastors were always white men who believed it was their divine right to save the world. Now I'm going back to leaning on the research of Dr. Willie James Jennings out of Yale Divinity. And Dr. Jennings does an incredible job of kind of reflecting on this quote unquote theology of the ideal man, going all the way back. And I'm thinking Dr. J. Cameron Carter does that. Dr. M. Sean Copeland, who's my favorite theologian today living, where they talk about this kind of ideal man, where, especially in colonial times and beyond, Christianity and whiteness and maleness, and even one would say straightness, was wrapped up into what one believed to be purity and salvation. And so as these Europeans go to discover and conquer the world, they're also utilizing religion to kind of shape them in what Willie James Jennings calls their ideas of maturity, who approximate closest to Jesus. And in their minds, it was always the white, male, land-owning Christian. And we see it even today in politics. We see it today in so many different ways, that many of the standards today, though so many people are pushing against it and have done for decades and centuries, we still live in a country that believes that if you're white, male, and Christian, you're worth more value than if you're Black, non-Christian, and gay, or Black, non-Christian, and woman, and Black, non-Christian, and trans, or Black, Muslim, and woman, or man. Like if you don't approximate to those standards of whiteness and maleness, then you're still seen as second class and less than, and judged far more harshly and treated with less compassion and grace and commitment than if you're white, Christian, male, and wealthy. We see this if you look at seminaries. Take white seminaries. Oftentimes in an organization, you can tell who that organization desires by who is already in positions of power. And when you look at many of these seminaries, their positions of power are filled by white Christian men. And we got to understand that these individuals not only shape the institution, but they shape the curriculum and who gets listened to and what they desire to be the person of faith or the intellectual once they leave. And so we see this work its way out in all types of ways, whether that's business, policing, university presidencies, and things like that. We still live in a country where white men and white Christian men are treated as more valuable than others.
Yeah, and that is, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that as people, a lot of millennials have kind of not necessarily abandoned God, but abandoned church? And do you think that some of that plays a part as they discover themselves being not connecting with what is being taught in the quote unquote mainstream?
Oh yeah, indeed. When in the book I wrote that, you know, that people often talk about young people and faith and think that, you know, they've given up on faith, and then many did, and we need to create room for that. We need to have room for people to walk away and to not lose anything of their relationship with God, but actually walking away and leaving can be a journey of discovery. We know this is true because in the Bible, in Luke chapter 24, we meet two disciples on the road who are walking away from the places that gave them meaning, who are walking away from the places where people would consider to be the centers of spirituality and faith. And we have to say that being able to walk away can be generative. But there's also the possibility that those who stay, you know, can reframe and transform this experience of faith and take on better faith. But the problem is that when we judge people's experience of faith based on certain traditions and theologies and concepts of what is indeed faith, then oftentimes we will miss what God is doing in other people's life because we're not willing to grow and to change the ways in which Jesus showed us we should be growing and changing. One of the scriptures I love the most from Jesus is that when he came up on the Pharisees, and many people use this as a way to kind of write off the whole Pharisaic tradition, which I'm not of that perspective. But he was talking to these particular individuals who Jesus says, you do all these things, but you have forgot the weightier matters of the law. And on another occasion, Jesus said, you have heard it said, but I say to you. And then for me, in my own sanctified imagination, I imagine it's like Jesus is saying that your faith may be public, but it is also problematic. That your faith is about what you do out there. You're not as concerned about who you are hurting and erasing and shaming in here. And so I think for many young people, I think for many young people, I think there's something about youthfulness that allows young people to explore and have the audacity to explore. And I'm more proud of people who get older, who keep growing, who keep changing, because I feel like life is a continual process of discovery. And if we are to find, life and true life, we would do like Jesus did, that he is somebody who grew in wisdom and stature. And we should not say that when Jesus was murdered in his 30s, that, that process of growth and maturation stopped. No, it was cut off, because he was murdered. And had he lived to 50, I believe that Jesus in his 40s would have been wiser than Jesus in his 30s. He would be continually trying to grow and intersect his own reality with other people's reality as well. And I think one of the best things we have to offer both young and old is a journey of faith that says that the question, the commitment to wrestling, the commitment to reading and growing and understanding is something that's biblical, not only biblical, but that makes us better. And what better way, to exist together as people, particularly as young people and older people, what better way than to exist in a space where we continue to question ourselves and grow together, and I think for many of us, young people, we're tired of people not understanding there's a difference between being emergent and being emeritus.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. I like that. Well, Dante, I want to thank you so much for just coming and talking to us today. I love your truck. It is awesome, awesome truck. And just listen, get this book, y'all. I'm telling you, get this book, Shoutin in the Fire, an American Epistle by Dante Stewart. I'm telling you that this book will give you language to understand some things. His writing is so poetic, and your use of metaphor is amazing. I have to give you that. I love it as a poet. It really was great. So thank you, Dante, again, for taking time out of your busy Saturday when your kids and your family need you to talk to little old me, to Star of Zion, to Divitude. And I hope you have an awesome rest of the day.
Oh, thank you. Bless you, my sister. Bless you. Bless you.
All right. Now, y'all go ahead. Remember that you can eat the entire world. You know how you can do it. One bite at a time.
Amen.
Deuces.